weed of the month is clover. It's white clover. Now there are hundreds of different clovers that you might see out there. Today I'm specifically talking about Trifolium repens, white clover, also called Dutch white clover. This is the most common in southeastern lawns. It's also seen a lot in roadsides, open places, disturbed places like we've talked about before. This is another weed that follows human activity around and takes root, just loves those disturbed soils. And the clue again is in the name Trifolium repens. So trifolium refers to the leaf. There are 3 leaflets. That's the tri part. Folium means leaf. Repens means crawling along the ground, crawling or creeping. And this plant grows by stolons. It doesn't grow from one center point like many of the other weeds we've talked about, the rosettes, such as hairy bittercress. So Trifolium repens, we just talked about one of the ID features is the 3 leaves, but also, and Alex, I'm going to ask you to cut to the picture of the leaf. You'll see in the center what's called a chevron. It's a lighter green or pale creamy color, and this is the clover, also the lucky clover. So it's generally 3 leaves, but it also comes in 4 leaves. That's the lucky 4-leaf clover. You'll also see 5, 6, or 7. So Alex, if you'll cut now to the flower. So the flower is a round flower head, but it's really comprised of, actually you probably hear the peacock in the background there. That's that weird little trumpeting noise. So the flower is in the pea family, which is also the legume. There she is, or he is. That's Feathers, the store peacock. So back to the flower, thank you. So the flower is in the pea family. I'll just go over that one more time from the top. And you can see the pea-shaped leaf. If you're familiar with vetch or sweet pea, you can see that shape there. So pea family is also called the legume family. And if you remember back to some of your science classes, what do legumes do? They fix nitrogen. They fix nitrogen from their roots. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more later. So the habit of white clover is creeping. Some of the other clovers, well, actually, it starts out when it's young. You can see it's a little plant. It starts out with a taproot. So the taproot ends up, it stays there, but then from that, it starts growing out from stolons. If you'll remember, your warm season lawns grow by stolons and rhizomes. Clover, this clover, white clover, also grows by stolons, and that's the repens part. So otherwise, it's generally a pretty loose, open habit, but it can end up growing, 12 inches, 18 inches, up to 2-inch patches in your lawn. But it's a pretty loose, open habit, and the flower heads, I don't have any flowers on this, but the flower heads are borne on stalks that do not have any leaves. That's another ID feature for white clover, is that the flower stalk has no leaves. So another common clover you'll see is the crimson clover. It has it has red, beautiful crimson red flowers that are shaped more like you'd think a rabbit's foot, a rabbit's hind foot. There's also another plant that you'll see this time of year called yellow wood sorrel or lemon clover. It is not a clover. It's not Trifolium species. The species of that plant is oxalis. There are many oxalis out there. You'll probably see a grocery store potted plant is the purple-leafed oxalis. It's very beautiful. That has trifoliate leaves, but it is not a true clover. It is not a trifolium plant. So we have this theme going about eat it or treat it. So I'm not going to eat this plant, but it is edible. The leaves are edible. The flowers are edible. I was reading you can put the flowers in salads, and even the seeds are edible. They're edible for humans. They're also edible for wildlife, such as rabbits. White clover is also a huge forage plant for livestock. It is also, well, I'm going to go into the fixing nitrogen part. It is a great cover crop for when you're letting your vegetable beds rest, or farmers letting their fields rest. They plant seed of white clover and they use it to restore the soil because it fixes nitrogen. And what does fixing nitrogen mean? It means that there is a bacteria that grows on the nodules of these roots, and it takes nitrogen from the air and it converts it and adds it to the soil. So it replenishes soil nitrogen. And when the plant is done growing and you're ready to plant your crop, it's best to mow it down and then you till it back into the soil. You don't clear it from the land. So that's another way to add nutrition back to the soil. And this is I mentioned it being a wildlife food such as rabbits, but it's also a pollinator plant. When those flowers are out, the bumblebees and the honeybees and all sorts of flying insects will be buzzing from flower to flower and pollinating it. This plant is also a larval host. That means the larva eats it. It's not a pollinator. Well, maybe it is. I shouldn't say that unequivocally, but it's a larval host for the cloudless sulfur butterfly, which is a beautiful yellow butterfly you'll see in the southeast in summer. When you're wanting to get rid of this in your lawn, we had some eradication steps, and I myself dig this out of my lawn, but I wanted to tell you some of these neat beneficial things for you to consider when it's growing in some marginal areas or ditches outside of your home. Consider leaving it for the wildlife. I did bring some of the wild yellow sorrel. It is no longer in flower, but this is kind of how it grows, is a little bit floppy. This again is oxalis. It's not a true clover, but it grows from a taproot. And you'll see this, it really pops up in my vegetable garden, and since it's not a clover, I'm not going to keep it growing in the vegetable garden. It's not fixing the nitrogen for me, but you'll see it has the trifoliate leaf as well. But the flowers are yellow, and they're not pea-shaped. They're more of an open flower with, I think it's 5 petals. I'm sorry, I can't remember right now. But when I see this growing, I leave patches of it in my vegetable garden or in my flower bed. And of course, I do plant the crimson clover in an open area by the roadside to enjoy. That's in the blog post. We'll link to that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about eradication, and I had to get my killer tool here. Talking about, I'm going to get that back. So talking about eradication, every month we mention the best way to prevent weeds is, prevention. So it's spraying or spreading a pre-emergent herbicide in September and again in February to prevent weed seeds from germinating. Also, time-tested trick is mulching your beds. If you do not want to create a patch of some weeds for pollinators, mulch your beds. It will save you a lot of time. It will conserve water in those beds for the plants that are growing there. One of my favorite tricks is simply hand weeding. I have 2 patches of this in my lawn. My lawn is 1,000 square feet, and it really stands out. They've grown, I've let them grow. For one, I wanted to observe them for this video and to weed some out. But to weed it out, it is tricky. This is my favorite tool to do this. You can see there's a sharp point. This is called a hand plow, and it's from Red Pig Garden Tool. You can order it online. I love this gift. I love this so much I gift it to people, like it's a good housewarming present or a hostess gift. And I get in there with the little tip, so I have the Xeon Zoysia lawn, and I am able to pry up all the little runners and get them all out of there good and thoroughly. I am also prying up the Zoysia runners at the same time, and that's okay. When they're up and kind of tangled all over the place, I just pat them back down, and I put a few handfuls or scoops of the soil cubed on top, and I water it in, and I just get it going again and repairing itself in the patch. You will not notice it in a couple of weeks. So this tool I recommend highly. Also mowing, but mowing is a little bit problematic. I have been noticing that my cut height of 2 inches, this plant is adapting to it and it's flowering under those 2 inches of my mow height. So it's flowering and going to seed. That was not a peacock, that was Greg's cell phone. I'll get him back though. And so that's something to consider. When you're mowing, it might not be the best way to prevent this weed sometimes a year, especially now when it's just flowering that short. Get out your hand tool, dig it up. Now, you can also spray chemicals. There are a couple of post-emergent herbicides that work on it, Quincept and 3-Way Max, but Greg told me he recommends all the methods. This one's a little more difficult to get rid of, especially because of that stolen nature. It's just a super vigorous plant. I just explained to you about the mowing. So you'll want to do pre-emergent herbicide. You'll probably want to be hand weeding if you just have some small patches, and you'll probably want to be applying some chemicals to your lawn as well to get rid of it. But it can be beaten, or you can just leave it in some of those wild places. That is it for the weed of the month.